Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Global Voices podcast. I am your hopefully amazing host, Arshad and I cannot wait to embark on this journey with all of you guys. It's going to be so exciting, and we have so many things that we want to talk about with so many, hopefully, incredible guests. And speaking of guests, before I start talking too much, I'd like to introduce someone who is joining us today, someone very special. Ila, please introduce yourself, say who you are, let the people know.
Absolutely, yeah. Hi, it's so nice to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation. And yeah, I'm Ila, and I always struggle to introduce myself. But I guess I think I have many roles in life, and I'm still figuring out what those are. But I think one that's pretty relevant to our conversation is I work with an organization called Youth by Youth, and I am the Community and Allyship Weaver. Which is, it brings up more questions than it answers, that title. So
Better than my title, which I realize I haven't actually said. So let me introduce myself as well properly. Hi, I'm Arshad, 26 now, 26 years old, and I currently work with the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation. I work on an aspect of the foundation, an activity called Act2gether, which is basically our big project and social movement that we're trying to create around basically bringing children and adults together to work through partnership, because we believe in intergenerational collaboration, and we believe that together we can achieve so much more in the world. My actual specific role is more coordinating our group of young people and supporting their needs and working with them to help bring their ideas to fruition. One of those ideas is this podcast. So maybe I'm doing a good job. We'll see. But like you mentioned, Ila, I think one of the things that we want to talk about today, or the main thing we want to talk about today, is actually something I just mentioned, partnership between generations. And so I guess before we go into that, just wanted to see what your thoughts were on what that phrase actually means.
I think that intergenerational partnership is both a sort of a bit of a buzzword. This is me having done 6 months of a degree in international development. I'm like, so guys, let me tell you. Honestly, it was something. But I did come out with some, the chance to look at the kind of academic literature on partnerships. And actually, when I was thinking about our conversation today, I was thinking about like global South, global North partnerships and power imbalances. And I know we'll get to that, so I just want to kind of drop that in and frame it as something that is potentially like that can potentially partnerships can reaffirm the very systems that they're seeking to undermine. And I see partnerships. I mean, a lot of the work that we do at Youth by Youth is exactly about intergenerational partnerships, even though we might not call it that. That's really what it is. And that's a big part of my role as the allyship weaver is really similar. I think we're really nicely paired in our roles, actually. We do something very similar. Is connecting our community, looking after our community of young people and connecting them to our community of adult allies. And that there's so much potential in intergenerational partnerships. And I completely agree with you. I think that like we're not gonna create the world that we so deeply want to see by it just being young people or it just being adults. And we've seen it just be adults. And we see what happens when it's just young people on their own, like youth summits and school councils, and the value that that has. And I think the real value, the way forward is us working together across all sorts of differences.
For me as well, looking at even the phrase like partnership between generations, I think that confuses a lot of people sometimes, because people just don't think that there is partnership between generations. Like there's, like you mentioned, there's power imbalances and things like that. Like when I think generations, say in a family, and there's like the children, the parents, the grandparents, etc. And you would never talk about partnership between children's and their grandparents. It was more grandparents are there to support, look after the parents and then the children, and the children just get coddled, let's say. um, but then I think it's interesting that in itself because no one thinks that it's something that is normal or should happen. There's so much that we miss out. Um, like you mentioned in school councils and things like that, there's so much amazing thing that young people can come up with and share and work together with adults on, but they just don't because it's not a norm. People don't accept it, or not that they don't accept it, people just don't consider it. And I think that in itself is something that hopefully, like through the work we're both kind of doing, that's something we can change. Um, because yeah, I feel like coming back to my organization, we should act together. I think it's acting together is something through which everyone can benefit. Um, just seeing how people thrive and learn from one another in just normal partnerships. Just think about how much you can grow, not only as a young person working together with an adult, but also as an adult working together with a young person. I think there's so much to learn from both sides that it's quite confusing to me that it hasn't happened as prominently already in the world. Um, but I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Why do you think that partnership between generations isn't something that's as commonly spoken about, although both of our organizations do?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think the dominance of adults in the world is quite an important thing to note. That even though actually there's a lot of us young people, and we're not on the most part being quiet about the fact that we have opinions about the world and we want things to change. I think we're trying our best to make our voices heard. But I think you're right that this, like, really, it's like this prevailing notion that goes right back to. I wrote an article for an organization I worked for a couple of years ago about the importance of including young people. And in it, I researched the kind of 1800s Victorian times in the UK and the way that children were seen with basically, the general way. Of course, this isn't true for every child, and there's always exceptions to the rule, but with basically contempt. Like, children were not, they were kind of seen as useful because they were nimble and they had little fingers and they could go up chimney sweeps, but they weren't really seen as like full human beings. And I really think that we see that with all these kinds of isms, that like part of the issue is our fear of the other. And so, in that fear of what feels kind of unknown, we dehumanize them and we don't see them as full beings, and we allow that to be the reasoning for why, yeah, we don't include young people, or we marginalize them, or we deliberately do things that we know will harm them, like a lot of what I personally think our government is doing right now is going to harm us and is harming us. um but in that is something interesting, because it's like, it's not a complete fear of the other, though, because everybody was once a child. And that's what I find so interesting, particularly about like this difference, about the difference of adults and children, is that it's not, and I guess in some ways that is true about most differences, that there are always threads of similarity. But yeah, I really liked how you brought it back to the family, because I think that that's one of the key sites of change happening, is what we do on a familial and a community basis really spirals out into the world. And I was thinking about my family, and I know you know this because we come from similar cultural backgrounds, that like deference to your elders is very important. And that it's taken, like, because I'm now, a few generations being in this country, that I speak to my nanny, who's my maternal grandma, in a very different way to how I would speak to her if I grew up in India. Like, I am, because, and she's not really a fan of it. She finds it very confusing. It's like, whoa, this is not quite correct. But that actually, I have this beautiful mix of culture of real deference to her, and touching her feet and being blessed and being really respectful of age. And something that has come from growing up here, where I'm aware that actually age isn't everything, and age doesn't automatically mean that you're wiser and smarter. Um, and that's allowed us to, I think, have more of a partnership. We have this great relationship now where, I mean, I think she's hilarious. Like, I honestly just think she's the funniest person. But also that I'm attempting to collect an oral history of her life, because I think it's a really interesting and important life, and I don't want it to be lost. And it's very slow going. I'm doing it like aside from work, so it's in the kind of moments. Basically, it's over dinner is when we tend to do it, because that's when she wants to chat. But yeah, it made me think of like, what if more people did that though?
The thing is, for me, I find that quite interesting actually, because you touched upon this a little. You said that uh, although we have similar upbringings, you're several generations down in this country now. Whereas for me, I'm actually the first child in my family that was born here, and so I think that makes me first generation, whichever. Yeah. So first,
Yes, yeah, yeah. And I think I'm third.
the difference is, I'm thinking that even between us, although sharing similar backgrounds and cultures, I think the family dynamics in my case are a bit different, let's say. Um, and I don't know if that brings it back to the whole cultural discussion around partnerships between generations and such. But yeah, I think for me, the discourse between generations isn't as prominent, um, unfortunately. It's definitely more so there are these instilled dynamics between different generations. There's these roles that each person fulfills. And it's not necessarily wrong to say, because I don't want to say that's completely wrong, that's the wrong way to live your life. Because it's just culture. That's how things have worked for so many years in that culture. And so it's quite interesting to see how you can still raise a family, and hopefully they've done a good job. Hopefully I'm I'm a good child, but not have that intergenerational partnership happening and in the way that we would like to. But yeah, I think that I think you telling me your experiences, that threw me a little, because it's not something I was exposed to or something I'm aware of really. But I found that so amazing, just talking over dinner. It's incredible.
No, it is. And it has. I mean, it's taken work. It was not like this when I was growing, and it's easier because we live as an intergenerational household now. So there being three generate, which I think is amazing. I think it's incredible. It's such a rich experience. It's also weird. Like it's weird having my mum.
Yeah, I can't imagine picturing my parents as the babies of the household.
But I think that's valuable. I think it's valuable to like see the children in adults. I think that coming back to this kind of broader idea of intergenerational partnerships, and I mean, I think we could just talk about our families for the rest of this, but maybe the more interesting thing for other people is like how that relates, and that there's something about on both sides being able to see the child that an adult once was, especially if they do something that's quite difficult to deal with. And maybe on the side of the young person, seeing them as a full human being, no matter how young they are.
No, I completely agree, because I feel like ultimately it does boil down to, in a way, understanding the other person and understanding them in a holistic sense. Because in the most part, the intention's always good. The intention's always there, and people do want to connect and grow together. But it's more so, I guess, from a family perspective or my family's perspective, culturally, there's certain roles you have to fulfill, and you want to raise them, protect your children, etc., etc. But I think it's really cool that in your family, like you said, because you're able to witness the intergenerationalism. I guess I'm going to use that word. Um, sure, but the fact that you're able to see, like you said, the child in the adults, it's it's quite. humanizing and helps bring you all onto a sort of equal level, which I guess is really important when it comes to trying to form partnership between generations. Because, as we mentioned before, sometimes the power imbalances is the thing that actually is quite limiting and doesn't allow people to work together in that way. And from the sounds of it, it's working incredibly well for you and your family. And I guess it's something interesting because how can we take that sort of mutual understanding and partnership and apply it into like a wider sense to move away from our families in a way?
Yes. Yeah, well, I guess the key thing is that it's very messy in my family, and it's not good every day. Like we have those beautiful moments, and and I think this applies to wider partnerships, that there is going to be a lot of frustration and working it out together and navigating dynamics, and especially with power. I guess the key thing is that, and I can fall into this, like power is bad, is that like power isn't necessarily bad. Actually, what we just want, exactly as you were saying, is equity, like to really like address the power imbalance. And I think in my perspective as well, the relationships I've had working with adults, and yeah, I guess I'm 20, it's maybe good to put ages in there. But the relationships I've had, so I'm already aware that like I'm kind.
We're still young. We're still young. Don't worry. We're children. We're children. We're children. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's all good. We're still young people. Um, I thought then I shouldn't be taxed. I don't want to pay tax, but no, it's true. I'm paying my tax. Don't worry, guys. Yeah, we'll pay tax. But the the issue, the crux of it for me has been like when that power dynamic hasn't been recognized by the adult, it's meant that we've started off the partnership on like a weird place where we're both like, oh, we're equals in this, except I'm very aware that I'm not an equal in this, and I'm not viewed by the world in the same way you're viewed, and you know what I mean? It's like this.
No, I agree. I think there's many cases in the world today where, like we said, like partnership between generations is not as much of a norm as we'd like for it to be, but it is starting to gain traction in a sense, and a lot of people are seeing it and they're thinking, "Oh, this is sort of like jumping on a trend in a sense where they want to do it because exactly they want to jump on the trend and raise their own profile for whatever reason, make themselves look better, but then it ends up being sort of in not my experience but what I've heard from some people I've spoken to, there are situations which they've described as youth washing, where it's pretty much young people are used as a showpiece to say, yes, I'm working together with this young person. It's incredible, this partnership, yes. But deep down, it's really, I'm in charge. I'm the boss. I know what I'm doing. I don't need them. And I think that in itself is, again, like you said, it comes back to the whole power imbalancing and the lack of, not necessarily the lack of understanding, but sometimes the unwillingness to let go of the power and unwillingness to understand the other perspective. And I think that's another interesting point because it is one of those obstacles that seems like it should be an easy fix, but why isn't it?
Hmm, I think it's hard to let go of things that, I think also because it necessitates this larger unraveling, doesn't it, about that person's individual positionality in the world. And in my experience, the partnerships that have felt like youth washing have been partnerships with people with quite a lot of privilege. And so it's almost like, if you start to think about, oh, what do I have as an adult that this young person doesn't have? It's like, oh, maybe I need to think about my race and my gender and and all of this and all my wealth and all of this stuff that I think we kind of are seeing as a can of worms at the moment. Like, oh, this is it, and then you'll feel guilty forever, and then you'll never be able to act or do anything good. And it doesn't have to be. Like, I think there's a lot of narrative changing that and shifting that needs to happen, which I think is what we're both working on in our own ways. Um, but I've definitely experienced the youth washing. Like, that's such a good term for it because I do think over the last 2 years, maybe really since the pandemic, it feels like young people have become trendy. Um, and to have your youth board and your youth council, that's a it's a cool thing to have now. You know, no like regenerative or sustainable organization would be seen without it. But there is always that question of how much say do these young people actually have in how you operate as an organization? Are they in your core team meetings? Are they, these important questions, I think, about um, structure and governance, actually, and who holds the power. And I think my experience of Youth by Youth, because it is kind of, as it says on the tin, run by like young people, that we're all young on the team, I've been like, wow, so this is what it's like when young people have the power. And I mean, we've not messed it up so far. So, if on a small scale we can do this, it's like maybe actually on a big scale we could be given a bit more, I think.
Hopefully. But I think no, that's interesting because now that you've mentioned Youth by Youth, I think I'd like to touch on that a bit more and just hear more about the work that you guys do because, like you said, you're a young team working together and you're achieving quite a lot, and it sounds quite substantial the work that you're putting in and the impact that you guys are having. So I guess for me and the audience, it might be really cool just to hear a bit more about the work that you guys do and how you're implementing partnership between generations into your work activities.
Absolutely. So I guess the kind of the first thing is our aim and our point of being alive as a collection of people um, really came out of the co-founders reckoning and realizing that who were both involved in the education sector already, and they'd kind of both young women of color. Um, this realization of like there are some key voices missing at these big conferences and at these big events, and it's young people specifically from the global south who are really, or from global majority backgrounds. Like these are the young people who are really missing, and their voices aren't being heard, and they're actually being marginalized, either due to access or just generally it not being like, even if you are invited, like it not being accessible to get there or all the stuff. So kind of pre-pandemic, I think that was a real thing. And then the pandemic hit, and it was immense to see the conversations that happened around education that took place without considering what the people in education thought. Um, and I think that was huge. And obviously, we know that across the world, like education was affected very disproportionately, um, and that it still is affected. The pandemic's not over, and the effects on our education system are still very much being felt. So Youth by Youth really came out of this. It came out of like, okay, so let's make a space for young people. Let's accelerate this process of young people designing education. Like, let's hand the reins over as much as we possibly can. Um, and so, yeah, it is for youth by youth. I'm wearing my t-shirt, but you can't actually see it because it always happens. It's like you just can't see it on the camera. Um, anyway, I think it's a very clever logo, but that's that we do this by providing our global network of young people who I just love. They're all incredible and doing amazing things. So, like, everyone has their own project, they have something they're involved in, and then we come together, provide them with a community of support. And essentially, I haven't almost quite found the right word to describe what it is that we offer. They're programs and they're training, but they're more than training. It's like really about enhancing their learning, but also about their ability to take care of themselves, and which we know is really really important. Um, so yeah, so we're education act we're building a movement of education activists, and taking that really seriously, like that education is a portal to the rest of the systems and the structures in our world. How we educate our young people is in direct relationship to how the world looks. And we see that really importantly. So we see education as a very big, broad thing, and it's not just limited by school. Um, and yeah, I'm hoping that that really catches on, that we start to recognize the beauty of lifelong learning. So yeah, so I think so partnership, and we have a circle of like incredible adult allies who really support us and who enable us to do our work, and that's been really important. You know, adults have wisdom when it comes to accessing funding and like really important things that actually being in these fields or industries for a longer time gives you knowledge about. And then part of what I do is we have an allyship program, and this took a different form last year, but this year we kind of sat back and thought like, okay, how do we really make this both effective and beautiful? And I think that's really important for me when we talk about partnerships, that like relationship building is beautiful. It should be beautiful, and messy and all of the things, but that felt, yeah, that felt really important to think about in the design of this project. And so what we're having is we've invited um, kind of our a cohort of our young people who are going through one of our programs at the moment called our Weavership, plus our other people in our community to come along to these sessions that will be big discussions on themes that they've chosen, um, with a collection of our really kind of trusted and beloved allies, and allow for both like a big roundtable discussion, you know, all on Zoom, about I want to talk about what does it mean to like have good communication, or what does it mean to do public speaking, and then allow individual relationships to foster in breakouts, and really encourage like intergenerational partnership in a way that's not only we have this project, let's work on this project, which is also really great, and we're also building that, and but also in a way that's like, let's have more spaces where it's just adults and young people actually interacting and talking to each other, and where both people are coming with a commitment to, I'm not your mentor, I'm not above you, I am your ally, I am learning what it means to be in solidarity with you, I'm learning what it means to be an accomplice, like how can I best support you, you know, you're doing, like we've got young people doing really amazing things, and actually what they need is not just someone who's going to go, oh yes, really understand those issues, oh yes, 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 we need someone who's going to be like, okay, great, how do I get involved? What
Wow,
do
no,
you
that's
exactly?
incredible. I feel like there's so many things that you touched on there that I want to comment on, but I don't know where to start. But I think what one area let's start with is I think the way you describe the activity that you guys are doing with that allyship program and the large group discussions, bringing people together, and then breaking off into different breakout rooms to discuss the specific issues is quite interesting for me, because I feel like through the work I've done as well, actually, we've done something similar. Um, Again, pre-pandemic, when we were able to more easily do events in person and gather larger groups of people, um, we organized something using open space technology, which is basically a way where anyone can present themselves to the crowd and say, I want to discuss this, this, and this. I'm going to run a session here. Feel free to join me. And for me, that was quite interesting, because at an event that we took part in the past and hosted, it was an intergenerational event where children and adults from around the world, different organizations, could come together, and we spoke about specific themes or whatever the theme was. And it was quite interesting for me, because when I was there, there was a child who came and to this open space session and said, "Hey, I want to talk about bullying in schools." And she laid out a whole session plan, and she invited people to come. And I went along to that to support her. And it was incredible just seeing the discussions that came out of it, how they facilitated the session, but also seeing how there was that intergenerational component to the session, and how different people had things that they could offer to the discussion, different ideas and perspectives. And I don't know if saying fortunately is the right word, but bullying is something that unfortunately a lot of people have or may have experienced. And so it was quite interesting and quite beautiful actually to see that no matter what age people were, no matter what gender or background people had, everyone could contribute to that discussion. And that in itself showed me that actually partnership between generations is something that could definitely work, because there is that common understanding that people have once you look past the different barriers like age, culture, background, etc. So I just wanted to touch upon that because that it made me remember something warm. It made me remember something nice. So it was a good memory. I just wanted to share that. But coming back to the discussion now, enough about me. I was going to say, you've mentioned the allyship program and you mentioned mentorship and partnership and all these other ships. But I guess one thing that I thought would be nice to discuss actually is what are the differences between, say, mentorship and allyship, and coming back to, I guess, the power imbalances and things like that.
I think that's a great question, and it's quite a subtle difference. I think that there's a lot of value in mentorship, um, but we've had to be really clear about our framing of allyship, which has been very interesting. That some people come and their assumption is like, oh, great, this is a mentorship. I'm going to be given help. I'm going to be given advice. I am a passive recipient of it. Da da da, like shower me, adult, with all of your understandings. Yeah, like I'll have it. And like, yes, time and place for that, definitely. And what we're trying to do with allyship, particularly, is what we were talking about before in terms of leveling the playing field, is like really recognizing the wisdom on both sides. And what I found that's very interesting is like in my kind of limited conversations with people that it takes a lot for young people to sit in, or for some young people to sit in front of an adult and feel like I have as much to offer in this conversation as you do. And just so the act of just being asked to imagine that you have as much to offer in a conversation as somebody who's twice or three times your age does, I think is really powerful. And I know that I can fall into that too, this deference to age, like that, yeah, is really, I think exactly what you're saying, is not, it's about the context of it. And so the key thing with allyship is that there is a recognition that there's a power imbalance, that we start there. We start with being like, historically, adults and children have not been equal. Today, we are not equal. So, how do we, on a relationship growing basis, how are we going to address that? And that we ask people to really show up with a lot of presence and we're ready to, exactly as you mentioned, I think right at the beginning, um, ready to learn as an adult that it's a two-way street. And I think that feels really important, like that the energy should flow in both directions, and that with a lot of mentorships, which is fun because it's actually, and with a lot of mentorships, it's not necessarily what the person is looking for. And so it's, yeah, it's kind of not, I think it'd be quite easy to fall into like really slating mentorships and being like, that's not what we want. But I think it really is about context, that in this context, especially in education, because of the teacher student power imbalance and what that's done to our education system and the way our education system is right now and the way learning is supposedly happening, that it feels really important that in an educational context, we offer young people the chance to feel on par with an adult. It's empowering, actually. It puts the power in
You
the
know, I think
physical
I
realm.
completely agree. And I think you touched on something quite important to mention as well before, where it is contextual. I think there are some cases where allyship is key because, like you said, it's quite empowering for all parties involved. And it's quite just humanizing in a sense. But there's also, I guess, some contexts where actually mentorship is more important because of whatever reason. I know, I think, for example, when it comes to things like safeguarding and online safety or children's safety, allyship, maybe it is amazing, and perhaps one day we can reach there. But it is something I feel like mentorship is more important for, because obviously there's a sense of duty to protect and take care of young, vulnerable children, and similarly vulnerable adults who exist as well. So I think that's quite important to touch upon quickly. But then I guess I wanted to mention as well, in the best way to put this, you mentioned how sometimes it is a case of young people putting themselves out there and getting that sense of empowerment from working together with adults and feeling not only heard but also acknowledged and understood. But then, in my experience, and it could just be me, maybe I'm weird, I don't know. But I can remember when I was younger than I am now, although I'm still young. Um, so, because even for me, when I first got involved in, let's say, this world of youth work and all of this partnership between generational work, I was just a normal kid. I didn't really know much about anything. Um, Go UK education. But
Yeah, isn't it? I've done 18 years of schooling, but I'm not really sure what's going on.
there was a lot of, let's say, imposter syndrome sometimes, I feel, because it felt at times that I was given a voice or I was given a platform to speak. And I was just there, like, why am I speaking? What do I have to say here? What do I have to offer? So I think that in itself is quite interesting because it's sort of a, I don't know if you can call it a self imposed power imbalance, where sometimes it felt like maybe the adult in the situation, they knew what to say, they knew everything. So why am I talking? And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Mm.
I, and internalized, isn't it? It becomes internalized. And I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at, but you've just illustrated it so perfectly. And I have this, I still have this sometimes in some places where I'm like, gosh, is my lived experience really enough to qualify me to speak about things? And then it's like, well, actually, maybe yes in this case, and maybe no in other cases, and that's fine. But right now, like, I think there is a, yeah, there's something here that's like more complex than I feel like I can quite articulate, also about the effect of youth washing on that sense of feeling like valued or valuable, which is a weird word to feel valuable, but maybe it's an important thing to feel. But do you know what I mean? Like, I've definitely been asked to speak at stuff where I've been like, huh, I don't necessarily know that you like actually cared about me as a whole person beyond like the image you see. And then that in itself like fuels this almost sense of inferiority of like, there's almost like this sense of distrust, I think. Yeah, I don't have the right words for it. It's just popped into my head when you said that. It felt really important, but yeah.
Sometimes, well, I guess it's another one of those obstacles when it comes to things like partnership between generations, because yeah, it's like when you're asked to speak or lead a discussion, sometimes you think, am I just a pretty face? Yes, but do I have something to offer? Maybe. And I think that in itself is something quite profound, actually, because sometimes we don't realize the contributions we can make. But that in itself is something through which I feel partnership between generations can resolve that. Because sometimes you need that support to say, no, what you have to offer is actually quite profound and it will benefit everyone. And I think that's something that you can only really get through something with partnership between generations, because as we mentioned, when you have that state of imposter syndrome, I'll call it for now, I don't know the right phrase, But when you think I'm not the right person for this, you know more than me, blah blah blah, and then the other party says, actually, I want to hear what you have to say because I'm really moved by what you have to say. And I think that is something, again, coming back to the whole empowering discussion, it is quite empowering because in my experience when I was there and I was like, why am I here? um, the development from there to where I am now, and suddenly all this, like, again, I'm not singing my own praises, but the fact that I've been given the trust and just the opportunities to reach the point I am now to do the work that I'm doing now and work with other young people and support them, I think it's not something I could have achieved without partnership, because doing this myself, not only would maybe I would not have been given the opportunities and the platforms to discuss or present myself in that way, but also the courage. I I would have been stuck in school still, um, hopefully succeeding. But yeah, I think that's it's just another reason why I think partnership between generations is actually something that's so necessary to the world and to loads of young people around the world as well, and not just young people, adults as well, because there's so much growth that can come from it, and just developing yourself, developing your interpersonal relations as well, and sort of discovering yourself in a way, because without experiencing the world and communicating with others, you don't really get to find out who you are.
That's beautiful. that's like that's like a little quote. Um, I completely agree, and I'm sitting here now reflecting on like when I came into this work, which was fresh out of school because they just ended school during the pandemic. They were just like, "Well, you're year 13, goodbye." uh, Last Thursday of school in March. That's it. You'll never come back again. Um, and I was really like, oh, I'm a bit lost. I don't really know what to do with myself. I've got all this time. I can't work. You know, all of these things, and I ended up doing some volunteering and having what I didn't realize. I think a lot of my partnerships have been quite informal, and the power of the relationship that was built through that and the doors that it opened for me have got me to where I am now. That so many of the connections, like that was it was in that role and in that relationship that the connection to Youth by Youth was made, and that like there are lots of things that I'm doing right now kind of as almost an individual that like I did not achieve as an individual. Well, I mean, I don't think like I exist as an individual, but that that having that system and that network of people of all ages who can support each other, I think is what's so beautiful. And that's the thing about partnership between generations, isn't it? That that's a key element of the network that maybe we're not necessarily ignoring, but maybe needs a bit more of our attention. Um, and I think that there's something about the relationship building aspect of that that's, I think, what we've almost been touching on this whole time. That what's really important is to establish trust and, yeah, be able to affirm one another. I think there's a lot of power also the other way around, like as a young person, being able to affirm the adult you're in relationship with too. And exactly, I've experienced the opposite too. Being affirmed by adults is beautiful. Um, yeah, it feels like there's something really beautiful about that process of developing a relationship together.
I think with school striking, it's quite interesting actually, because I feel like it's something that's a lot more prominent now, and maybe that's because of that sort of, people have seen it happen, because some young people such as Greta Thunberg and others, they've taken that initiative to initiate the discussion. And although it may not have worked initially with certain parties, certain generations of people, or certain people in positions of power, it has actually resonated with a lot more young people and empowered them in a way to start also speaking up and speaking out. And I feel like it's sort of triggered a snowball effect in a way, where now more and more people are willing to come to the table and have these discussions, which is incredible, actually. And I feel like it's something that's quite beneficial when it comes to the world of partnership between generations, because once more and more people start coming to that table and offering their support and engaging in those discussions, I feel like it then becomes easier to start having those talks and seeing what you can do together to make an actual change.
I think that's very true. It's like that kind of, if not us, who, if not now, when? Is that it? Like it takes really that like effort of like, I'm going to begin even though I can't see other people doing this. And I think that's the power of having kind of connections between actually people who recognize the power of intergenerational working, is that we can provide that like other bit of light in this big darkness of, oh god, no one's doing this. It's like, oh, okay, you're doing this and you're doing this, and you recognize the importance of intergenerational partnerships, and like that. I think that's how you grow a movement.
Yeah, no, I think exactly. No, it's true. I think sometimes you need those little steps to start. Well, yeah, you need to start walking before you can run. And I think it's quite amazing, actually, the work, even coming back to the work that both of our groups are doing, both our organizations, the fact that even here, like for example, looking at me and my journey, it was the little things, it was the little steps. Because at first, me being introduced into this world of advocacy and working with young people and partnerships, at the start, all I did was just turn up, maybe take part in something, lead a discussion. And now I get to work with all these amazing young people and actually work on things that matter and will actually make change in from an organizational standpoint, not just an activity. And I think that also goes to show the growth that can happen and the development in a wider scale. I think from my organization, the Learn for Being Foundation, we've recently, or been a year or two now, but we've actually introduced young people into our board of governance. So our board actually has young people who contribute and take part in board level decision making. And that I feel like is something incredible, because it's not something as a young person or as a younger person than I am now would have ever even considered, because you just don't think young people have that power, or yeah, like it's not something, not that they are incapable, it's just not something you would consider. And so the fact that organizations are now taking the initiative to listen to young people and actually acknowledge and adhere to their voices and make big decisions based on their voices, I think that's actually quite incredible. And it just shows how far we've come. And I know that there's still more work to be done, but it's quite uplifting seeing the potential and where we can go from here. And I don't know if you have the similar feelings with your organization and Youth by Youth, but it's quite incredible.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think my experience of like getting more and more involved and kind of now being on that core team and actually like making those decisions. We don't yet have a board. We're a baby still. We're all talking about, as an organization, we feel like we're walking now. We're like a toddler organization. And hey, a toddler's still a full human being, as we've been speaking about. Um, but experiencing the power of like, yeah, making these decisions as a young person, and being on the younger side of the team as well, it feels really powerful. Like, I know we have a member who's 16 and she's our youngest, and like she is on equal par. What she says matters. Yeah, what they say matters as much as what anyone else says. And I think that it is a mindset shift, actually, isn't it? I think it's the same with like bringing young people into your board. It's a mindset shift on the part of adults and on the part of the young people to be like, yeah, I can be on a board. I don't really know what you do on a board. I think it feels like a bit of mystery, but I think that kind of feels like what we're coming back to is like it's a narrative and mindset shift, and it's about prioritizing relationships.
Yeah. No, exactly. I feel like you said, I think this conversation we could go on for days, and there's so many different pathways we can go through. And naturally, I feel like we come back to the same area of how partnership between generations is important, because not only can you, in most circumstances, get the job done, but also it's quite empowering for all parties involved. I think as a young person, just saying I am on the board of this organization, that's bragging rights for days for you,
As it should be.
as it should be. But even as an organization, not just because it's not youth washing at this point when they are actually taking into account what the young people are saying. But I think as an organization, to say that actually I'm learning from these young people and they're having a profound impact on my life and how I relate with others, I think that's amazing, because it's also beneficial to them and their development as an adult and how they work with or how they relate to not only young people that they work with, but even, I guess, their own families. I think the growth and the development can be quite profound. And so for me, partnership between generations is just something that's so important. And although it's not as much of a norm in the world as it should be, in my opinion, I'm quite happy that there is progress being made and there is growth that's happening. And hopefully one day everyone is like us and everyone wants to work together. Uh,
A good world.
hopefully. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe we're wrong. No.
Who knows? Maybe it's a totally different way. Like, maybe we'll come back to this podcast in 10 years' time and be like, so guys, turns out it's not about relationships. Like, actually, cut everyone off.
Yes, like guys, now that I am in my 30s, we were wrong. Don't listen to young people.
Really hate all the 20-year-olds.
Yeah, I'll just delete this episode. It never existed.
Never happened.
So yeah, okay. Unfortunately, we are nearing the end of the podcast. But thank you so much for joining me today and having a chat with us. I think you raised a lot of interesting points, and I feel like the discussion went places I didn't even realize it would go. But I think that's the amazing thing about podcasts and like having these discussions, because for me and for, I guess, Act Together and Learn for Being as a whole, with our Global Voices podcast series, our intention is to do exactly what we did today. Just talk about a topic, see where it takes us, and just informally see the raw feelings that we have, our guests have, and hopefully the audience like to hear our raw thoughts and they like to engage with the discussions, and maybe, I don't know, maybe they'll quote some of what I've said today, some of what you've said today will become famous. Hopefully. We'll see what happens.
Or be celebrities. Oh, please don't. I really could think of nothing worse.
Hey, you never know, you never know. True, it does have its downfalls, downsides, so maybe not. But
I have the money.
oh yeah, oh definitely, I would love them. I mean, no, we are. I'm a humble person. Yeah,
I'll make do with my meager amount.
exactly. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today, and yeah, for everyone at home watching this, hopefully, this is the first episode of the Global Voices podcast, but we'd like to do so many more. We'd like to invite a lot more incredible guests, as equally incredible as Ila.
Could be hard to find. Very modest over here.
Of course, of course, of course. But yeah, there's a bunch of topics that we want to discuss, things that we've worked on before, like climate action, mental health. That's a big topic that people want to talk about, and so many more topics. So if you guys have any topics that you want to engage with as well and want us to talk about, please send that through to us. Just comment, email, anything. If you find us, talk to us, message me directly. Why not? But thank you guys so much for listening. And yeah, that is the end of the Global Voices podcast.
Episode 1. That's the end. This is it. We did one. I've decided I don't want to do it anymore, guys.
This is it. It's like everything we just said, forget about it. No, but again, thank you so much. And yeah, hope you guys all enjoyed. Take care and bye bye.